Earlier today, I posted a video or reposted a video that I saw on TikTok from this very well-spoken young lady who did a really great job of breaking down the numbers, explaining to people how much, the difference between the boomer in 1980 and the Zoomers now, right? Now, there's millennials and Gen X in the middle of all this, but she's a Zoomer, so she's going to get it from her perspective. And so one of the things that she pointed out, and she pointed out all this accurately, was the inflation is different. So, and this is something that I noticed even as a younger Gen Xer myself, growing up in a poor neighborhood. I grew up in about as poor as you could grow up, and in the projects. And one neighborhood over were the not as poor boomers, right? And they all had boats, and they could all drink themselves stupid. They could all get season tickets to the Seahawks. They could do all this stuff, and it's like these were the kind of the working class people. Well, I don't see too many people who've got that kind of money now that are the same age doing the same jobs. So one of the things that I wanted to follow up on, the purpose of this video, was to point out something that she was a little confused by. She was confused as to what happened, the difference between the pensions that happened, back then. Okay, so let me just briefly explain this. Right around the early 70s, it changed over from a defined benefit pension to a defined contribution pension. Let me explain the difference here. So really briefly, a defined benefit just simply means that the company hires you, and let's say it's in the 60s. Like my grandfather was given a job, I think 1963, and they offered him a job at Sears Roebuck and Company. He was going to be a delivery driver. Okay, he wore the little cap and everything, and he would deliver appliances. And the deal they told him was, hey, listen, work here, you're going to get your regular hourly, but when you retire, you're going to get X amount of money forever, for life, right? That was called a defined benefit pension. And his widow, right, his wife, would get a percentage. I want to say it was like 50 or 60%, something like that, of his pension, and she would get that for the rest of her life, right? That was the deal. It's called a defined benefit pension. In the mid to early 70s, that changed. If I'm not mistaken, it changed under the Nixon administration after he propped up China's communism in the 70s, early 70s anyway. They switched to a defined contribution program. And what that was is that the company would say, like, oh, hey, if you put, $1,000 or let's say $100 a month into your retirement, into your 401k, then we're going to match it dollar for dollar. Okay, and then what that would do is that whatever you had in there, once you had it to a certain amount of money, or when you went to retire, you had that much money and you could take that money out and live on it. That's when it switched over to a defined contribution program. Now, the problem with this, and this is the part that gets confusing for a lot of folks, is that actual issue is precisely why we're neck deep in shit right now, is because all of that money that got put into savings, right? It didn't go into savings. That's the problem. It went into gambling. It went into the stock market. Well, the stock market is savings. It is not savings. I've been over this. I've done probably 5 videos on this. Every 401k, every IRA, every mutual fund, every hedge fund, every single thing involving a broker. If there is a Series 7 broker anywhere in this whole thing, it says in black and white, and usually bold, italicized, all caps, underscored, the whole bit, it says it right there. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investors can and do lose money. Meaning that it shoved a bunch of people who thought they were saving money into a casino. And that's where that money just keeps getting churned and burned over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Now, you can say, well, that's fine. They're still saving money and they're growing the economy. No, you're not growing the economy. Remember, we've been over this. An economy is one thing. It's people. That's it. An economy is not a building. It's not a stock market. It's not a bunch of fucking politicians. An economy is people engaged in commerce. The problem is that when you put a bunch of money, a bunch of fake money, or you have a bunch of people saving money who think they're saving money, they put it in a stock market and it gets pushed into a bunch of companies, a whole bunch of private companies. They end up with too much money into those private companies and they start growing. The problem with this, then you can say, well, that's good, that's capitalism. No, the problem is that the money those companies got was beyond what they had any business getting. They shouldn't, in other words, the margins per location, and you see these places that have like 25,000 locations or 10,000 locations across the US or something. The problem is on a per location basis, they are not profitable enough to justify that kind of investment. And so what happens is that, well, but it's okay. The other ones offset that profit. No, it's not okay, because eventually your overall profit margins suffer as a result of that. This is 35 years of business talking here. Your overall profit margins do start to suffer eventually, and you're seeing it happen now. That's what's happening, which is why you're seeing it's why you're seeing these companies that have been buying customers for decades and decades and decades. Now, how do you buy customers? You just keep lowering the price artificially. Well, now they're bottomed out, which is, in fact, it's actually just this, what was it, Black Friday, where they're saying, like, there's no deals in Black, yes, because they're bottomed out. You can only go so low before it's not even, you can't even open anymore. They can't even afford to pay people anymore. They can't afford to, like, how many times do you go to the store and you'll see, like, there's 2 checkers, right? And then there's a whole bank of the so-called self-checkout. This products are the same price, but yet you still get to do all the work of checking your own fucking bags. And there's like 1 or 2 checkers, and there's like 60 aisles. Yeah, it's because they can't afford to put people there anymore. They can't afford any of this stuff. Nobody can afford any of this shit anymore. And it's because what they did was they grew too much of this stuff. Okay, they grew these businesses massive. There is no margin any longer. So now what would happen in a normal market? Had that not happened, there would have been a small business resurgence. Business in general, small businesses would have continued to flourish. But small businesses, they understand the local market a lot better, which means that they're not going to just decide, okay, hold on a second here. There's a big circus in town. I'll use the Peter Schiff analogy, right? Even though I disagree with Schiff on a bunch of stuff, but I'll use his analogy. The circus comes to town. A small businessman knows, oh, okay, I better not break out a whole wall and immediately take out $2 million in loans to, like, expand my business, because there's all of a sudden a whole bunch of customers to come to my business because the circus is in town. The circus is going to leave. Right? Like, we understand that. The circus is going to leave eventually. Small businesses understand that. The big companies, dude, look at the way they operate. They operate like governments for the most part. They're just as slow, cumbersome, and nobody's responsible for anything. Nobody owns anything. None of the people who work there own any of it, to any appreciable numbers. Do any of the people that work at, for example, like Walmart, right? How many of them own enough of Walmart stock to be genuinely concerned about their capital gains implications? Probably almost none. That's just reality, okay? I'm not saying that doesn't happen, and there probably are a few there. Maybe some of the higher end managers or some of the middle managers maybe care. But like the average Walmart employee on the ground, they're not really worried about their capital gains position for for fiscal 23. So this is becoming the problem. So to tie this off, to explain this, when they started putting all that money in there, that created all of the very problems that you're seeing today. All of the problems of all the inflation, and how there's none of the jobs pay anything anymore. Your degree is basically optional now. You really, in fact, if you're getting a degree anymore, I would tell you that I think you're crazy at this point. Any of the institutions, I think you're nuts if you're giving them any money. They're not worth it. The ROI just isn't there. It's not worth it to spend that kind of money to get something that probably isn't going to give you the return that you think you're going to get. Not anymore. There's just too many people that you're competing against now. There is a market saturation point, and that's what we're seeing. I've talked about this a long time ago. One of the very first videos I talked about was the idea of market saturation. That's what's happening. So because of all of that, you're supposed to see all these big companies start to go under, but they won't allow them to go under. And the reason they won't allow them to go under is because then all of a sudden you'll see the stock market go tank, go tits up. You'll start seeing a bunch of boomers lose a bunch of money. All the banks will be gone. I mean, they'll get just completely cleaned out. There will be nothing left of the banks. So, and then all of a sudden you'll see an economic collapse, right? And the good news on that is that you're supposed to emerge out of the ashes. This is where your small business, this is what happened in the Soviet system, right? I mean, your small business owners, or your people who understood all this stuff, they bought up all those assets and they made them profitable again. Now, obviously, you wouldn't want to do it the same way the Soviets, the old Soviet system did it, because all it did was create a bunch of oligarchs. But, and you really can't, you have to let the market work itself out. You have to have an honest free market. And of course, I would also suggest that if you're doing that, have an honest currency on top of that, and then this shit won't happen again. So I hope that somewhat explains to anybody out there who didn't understand the difference behind what happened with that, because it actually caused a huge amount of problems.